Good morning.
Good morning. And I today is February 19th, I believe, isn't it? I hope I've got that right.
Yeah, 19th grade.
2023. And our topic this morning is the world is your oyster. So I'm going to begin with an opening prayer. And so let's just go within. Let's go within where we know the truth of our being. Sometimes not always evident in our lives. Sometimes we close our eyes and go within to know the truth, the spiritual truth of our being, which is we honor the presence of our one power, one omniscient, omnipotent power that is everywhere present, including within us. This is the power of creation, the power without and within us that comes from the one source of all life. So as we focus on knowing that this life is for us and that the world is our oyster, within it we find the pearl of great price. And so we know that all possibilities is available for us as we learn to use and understand the laws of the mind, the laws of the universe. So we give thanks for exploring this topic today and being able to use it in a more meaningful way. We give thanks, we release, and together we say,
And so it
and
is.
so it is.
Well done.
Oh, thank you, thank you. So the first question I have is, what does that mean to you, that phrase, the world is my oyster? Um, we
So that means we're drowning?
Well, sometimes it feels that way,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
We're
So, go ahead.
Oysters are bottom feeders. Let's see.
All of that.
Oh, okay.
All
So
of
let's
that.
elevate it up a little higher. So,
Well, so often we get this quote from Shakespeare,
yeah.
who has one of his characters in one of his plays say, "Why then the world's mine oyster, which I with sword will open." And of course, it's referring to I may find the pearl. I might find something of great value there. And so if we make the world our oyster, we know that there's something in there that is very, very valuable that we may find
But
or open.
and he's also saying that he has to use a tool. And the question is, what are the tools he will use to open this oyster to find that pearl? And so the first thing we have to recognize, I think, is that we are not unto ourselves sufficient for any task. That is, we
Mm,
need to have the tools, and we often
tools.
don't know that we don't have the tools, or we don't know what tools we need, and therein lies the rub, or or
Right,
what
right.
can be the learning field that doesn't feel like a learning field, but feels like an irritation field.
Well, and it's both, actually.
Yeah.
Um, so Scott Aubrey says that the tools that we use, Scott Aubrey is a minister in our teaching, and he says that Shakespeare's tool was a sword. Our swords are the tools of vision, being able to visualize what we desire, the desire itself, belief, positive energy, effort, and determination.
And I would
So
add to that duct tape.
whatever it takes, everything it takes. But it's very true that those are the tools we use when we desire something and we want
Yeah.
to find that pearl. That pearl may be what you came here to do, what profession you came here to do, what relationships you came to engage in. All of those can be the pearls, the thing of great value. But it is also true that those pearls, are formed from sand getting into the oyster and irritating it. And
Hmm.
so what it does to prevent that irritation is the oyster shell actually creates more of what lines the shell, that shiny mother of pearl we call it, because it is the mother of pearl, but the oyster makes the same substance. It's called nacre to go over and over that grain of sand to make it less irritating to it. But I guess as long as it's there, it keeps adding to it.
Hmm.
So the big pearls have been there longer. They've been irritating the oyster longer, and so we need to take that as a metaphor also. Did you want to say more about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm also fascinated at the pearl. That the pearl, when you finally find that pearl, it is soft on the outside,
Beautiful, shiny,
beautiful, and hard.
like mine. I'm wearing my
Yeah,
pearls
yeah, but
today.
it's both soft and
And
hard.
hard, yeah.
That it's round, it has no hard edges. What's interesting is that everything about irritation doesn't exist in its appearance in the pearl. The pearl would seem to be the antithesis of irritation. It's soft, it's smooth, it's round, it bounces, and yet the condition that created it was not that. And so, what it makes me think of is that the conditions that we're in that often help us to create the pearl, they really are teachers. While at the same time, we wish that they weren't there. And I was going to spend. Well, you want to go next?
No.
Yeah, I want to spend a couple minutes with something I learned. Right now, I'm working on a co-authoring a book, and the person that I'm co-authoring a book with is an incredible writer and a kind person, and just I can't say enough good about her, but I won't. So 'cause I don't want it to go to her head, you know. But so yesterday was our first session of working with publishing this book, and what became
Not
aware,
publishing, setting it up for
setting up the
publication.
publish. Yeah, we're way from publishing it, maybe 5 or 6 years from now. I mean, when I look at how yesterday went, yeah, sometime in the next 25 years, we're going to have this book published. But what I discovered was something that I think is really relevant to all of us, and I don't normally share my personal experiences like this, but I'm going to because I think it's really relevant. We all have deficits. We all have things that we can't do very well. Typically, what we're able to do is to insulate ourselves from those experiences to the extent that we may actually live in the myth that we don't have any. And when I say that, I think when you look at the things that you can't do or that you have trouble doing, how many of those things do you set aside and then you create a false sense of I can do everything on my own. I'm independent, I'm capable. And we often teach that you can have anything, you can do anything, and that's actually not true. You can't have anything and everything, and you can't do anything you want. If what's required is that you be a tall person and you're not one, you're not going to become one. That's just the way it is. You can get a ladder, but you're going to be short. So, but what happened yesterday for me was not just that I ran into obstacles that I didn't know how to overcome. I had to confront the obstacles that are internal, that are my own obstacles that I've had for most of my life. You know, we talk about dyslexia, which is not I call it lexixia, which is not a fun thing to have. And yesterday, clearly, under stress, I saw more evidence of that interfering with the process. So what do you do? Well, I guess you have to become humble, which I'm not real good at. And you have to be willing to say, you know, I'm not doing this thing called living alone. What makes me think that I can? What makes me think that I don't need the ongoing support of a universe that is in favor of me? If the universe is in favor of you, it's in favor of helping you through whatever it is that you have difficulty with. What I think happens, and it happens to me at least, is that when I'm having trouble doing something, it feels as if I'm being stopped, and that the universe is not in favor of me. It's not the universe is not in favor of me. It's that I'm stopped because there's something wrong. I don't have the solution. I don't have the machinery in place to be able to make the changes that I need to make. But the reason I bring this up is we insulate ourselves with false notions of abilities that we don't have when we are hiding from the things that we know are limitations. And if we go back to the oyster story, which I love, the sand is what's wrong with you that is your teacher. The sand is the irritant that will teach you. When I was teaching college, one of the things that really impressed me was the students that came in who said, you don't understand what it's like to have to come here and try to learn when I have this thing called a learning problem or a reading problem. And what was really valuable was I would say to them, sit in the front seat. Why the front? You'll call on me, and I won't call on you. If you sit in the back, you'll be distracted because that's part of what's wrong with you. If you sit in the front, I'll have your undivided attention, and I promise you that I understand and that we'll work together. And my students did extraordinarily well. But they had their deficit that they brought in with them, the problem they brought in with them, in front of them rather than behind them. They were able to see how it was limiting them, but they couldn't see themselves operating beyond the limitation. Now, the key to that is I said, let me be a partner with you. Let me work with you on this. It won't be all up to you. We think that all problems that have to be solved by us, or we have to find a way to avoid them. And nothing's clearer to me than that than when I'm on I-95, which is one of our expressways, and I see traffic lined up, and I realize there's no way out. I'm going to have to just sit here or try to get off. But typically, what I try to do when I feel like I'm going to get stuck in traffic is to get off at that exit. We're well practiced at getting off at any exit that will allow us to feel like we're okay or that we're in control. And I think that's an important piece. So recognize you don't have a lot of control over a lot of things, and you don't have to. You're not alone in this universe. You're not working by yourself. Yesterday, I had the benefit of at least two other people that were working on the same thing that I was working on to try to help. Unfortunately, none of us were successful as we wanted to be, but together what I learned was that you don't have to do this by yourself. And if you think you have to do it by yourself, you're already going to be in trouble.
Yeah, and maybe one of the things you learned from that is that there are people to support you, and that we're not in this alone.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a lesson we have to keep learning because we live, I don't know that all of us do, but many of us live with a fair amount of denial that we need anything from anybody and that we can do it all by ourselves because we think we are. When I get Amazon delivering things, I realize if I had to go get all of those things, the amount of gas and time it would take me to get those things, I'm not doing this by myself. I think I have control because I can order something on the computer. The truth is, I have control over accessing a network of people who can support me.
Indeed.
That's huge. So, why that's also important is when you're trying to realize the life that you want to live, because it's not exactly happening the way you want it to. It's not what's wrong with you that's the problem. It's that you haven't invited the use of the proper tools, the necessary tools, whether that's people, places, situations, circumstances, knowledge, all of those things. And when you begin to access the support system that you have, that you don't necessarily know you do have the answers.
So I would like to move into another. This is a Bible quote from Matthew 13:45, and there it says, "The kingdom of heaven," which means your spiritual connection with God and knowing that you're one with Source. That's what the kingdom of heaven is. So the kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchant man seeking goodly pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all he had and bought it. So what was important to him was the pearl of great price. And so what that metaphor means, or what that, I guess it is a metaphor, is that we're all seeking, the most valuable pearl. But the most valuable pearl is having the kingdom of heaven. It's having your connection with Source. And I was asking Bob earlier, when did you first find that pearl of great price? When did you first find out about spirituality and your true nature? And he said,
When I was 14 and I discovered Edgar Cayce.
yeah,
Edgar Cayce was the opening of the door because Edgar Cayce opened the door to reincarnation, to a multidimensional world, to the possibility of healing for reasons that you couldn't explain. He just opened the door to worlds of information, but questions that people aren't asking and are consequently not getting answers to.
and for me, it was when I found the Science of Mind Center in Fort Lauderdale when I was about 30. But it was interesting because it was like synchronicity. Suddenly I was interested. I didn't even know what it was, the science. It was recommended that I go there. And so I tried it and liked it. But before that, I remember I asked my sister, she wanted to know what I wanted for my birthday. And I said, there's a book I've heard about called How to Use Your Psychic Powers. Not that I had psychic powers, but for some reason I was interested in that all of a sudden. And so I think that's where it started for me, although I certainly had religious experiences as a child, but I had put
Yeah.
those all away. So you might ask yourself that question, when did I start realizing that there was a pearl of great price that I wanted, and that was the most important thing to me? Another interesting take and idea on the pearl metaphor. There is a person named Richard Rohr, who is a retired Franciscan priest and writer, very prolific writer. As a matter of fact, in 2010, he was called the most influential spiritual teacher. Now, Franciscans are different from most priests. They usually, I wouldn't say anything all the time, but they usually are, they take a vow of poverty. They're cloistered. I'm being tongue-tied. They're cloistered, I believe. So they live a simple life, a quiet life of just basic work, basic food. But they're modeled after St. Francis, so their goal is to help and be kind to all creatures, all people. So this is not a typical parish priest. And he's written many books. So he reminds us that the oyster provides an interesting metaphor for us to consider when it comes to aging. In his book, Falling Upward, Spirituality for the Second Half of Life, he reminds us that the first half of life is about building our outer shell, our container. The second half, and the best part of life, is discovering the treasure that lies within. Our authentic self, our spirit, is hidden within. A great deal of the growth we experience, if we're willing, is caused by various irritants. The challenges that age brings are opportunities for growth. Whether we're dealing with health issues, retirement, downsizing, or a myriad of other challenges we face, we face the challenges of frustration and irritation. It takes only 6 months to form a pearl, and the longer it grows, the larger and more beautiful it becomes. We too have the time to steep ourselves in spiritual insights. The treasure is inside us, and there is no other place to discover the jewel but by looking inward. So I love that interpretation.
That's beautiful.
I love that interpretation.
I was reminded, as you were reading it, I was reminded of an interior designer who was relatively young meaning probably, I think, in her early 30s. And she had shown me a home, and she said, "This is a perfect house." And I said, "Well, tell me more about that." And she said, "Well," and I looked at the pictures of the home, and she said, "There's all of this space. Everything is open. There's nothing extra. There's nothing laying around." And I thought, that's interesting, because her idea, and she's young, is having lots of empty space. And so I asked her, I said, "Well, what is this space for?" She said, "Well, it's living space. I mean, I don't understand." I said, "Well, if you came to my home, you would see that the space is filled with my history, with my story, with my experience. I guess what you could also call junk or stuff that I have to dust and clean. But you see, you spend the first part of your life building the house, and what's interesting is, however beautiful the house is, it's largely empty. And by the time you finish the last chapter of your life, one of the reasons that you do that is because there's actually no more room for stuff. All of the history, all of the wisdom, all of the knowledge that covers the walls and covers everything. And so you could say that filling your house with the life experience is as valuable as building the house, or even maybe more valuable."
Exactly. So many of us are in the second half of our life.
Oh my God.
We've already built our shell, and not saying that many of us are not still working on more prosperity, but that this is really a good time to be going within,
Yeah.
and exploring your spiritual nature and using your spiritual tools, which are prayer, meditation, contemplation, and spiritual mind treatment, which we teach, affirmative prayer. All of that is ongoing, but it is wonderful to really get that you are the pearl of great price.
Yes.
You and your spirituality, getting to know who you are on the inside, and what those traits often learned from the irritants. We often practice forgiveness and empathy and understanding with our loved ones that may have hurt us at sometimes. You have to practice all those skills, and they develop you into a richer, deeper spiritual person, excuse me. So I think the thing is for you to ask yourself, what pearl am I seeking? What pearl of great bliss? Is it one of self-expression? And certainly we're all about that. You know, Bob with his art and working on publishing a new book with a co-creator, haiku writer, and that's self-expression.
Right.
That's putting out into the world your talents and your creations.
But not without difficulty, not without learning, not
Right.
without,
You
not
still
without,
have the irritants.
not without sand.
Put lots of sand.
If
in
you've
it.
ever been to the beach, you've learned that you never leave the beach there. You've learned that when you come home, where did the sand come from?
In our car,
I thought I got
especially.
it off, and there's sand everywhere, and that's because everywhere you go, you bring your own sand,
Yeah.
and it, you live with it and you accept it. The last thing I'd want to say is too, because we use the house as a metaphor and the shelter that you build, or the safe place that you build. When somebody comes into your home and says you need to get rid of all this stuff, you got too much stuff, and I would say, take them around with you and show them the stuff and tell them why you have it. Tell them what is beautiful and important about it.
Tell whom?
Whoever it is that tells you to get rid of your stuff.
Oh,
So somebody comes in and says, what's all this junk? What do they call it? Shotki or
tchotchkes.
tchotchke? I hate that word.
He hates that
Yeah,
word.
right. Because
There are objets d'art.
yeah. So I go to a gallery. I spend $1,000 for a piece of glass, and somebody comes in, a decorator, says, that doesn't go with anything. Get rid of that. What is that? Excuse me? You don't know the story. You don't know the history. So everything you have in your house, interior, your physical house or your mental house, has a story, has a reason, has a life, has something that has had value. It's just time for you to value that and to allow yourself to embrace it. Don't allow other people to tell you, or don't allow yourself to believe that when people tell you you need to get rid of it or you need to rethink it, that's necessarily true. Your life has value.
Besides, I think it's absurd for anyone else to tell you what to do with anything in your life or with you. It's none of their business.
Yeah, I learned a long time ago. I tried this with Judith. I would just tell her, don't feel that way, and it worked.
No, he didn't. But others in my life have.
Yeah. Just stop feeling that way. Damn. And Judith would say, oh, I never thought of that. No, that doesn't work. For those of you that are women watching this, you already know what happens when somebody tells you, don't feel that way. Stop that. Yeah. Right. So we don't like being told what to do, but we often, unfortunately, are our own worst critic, and we often tell ourselves what to do in the most negative terms. And what I would invite you to do in closing here is to look at what you might have called a deficit, a difficulty, a struggle as a teacher, and ask yourself how that teacher has matured you, has grown you, and supports, encourages, and empowers you. And having made that change can change everything. And you may have to do that again and again and again. Today I'm going to go back to work on publishing this book, and I will have to say that to myself 5 or 6 more times, I'm sure. This is a teacher. This is where you learn. This is not punishment. This isn't abuse. This isn't what's wrong. This is what you go through in order. This is the sand.
Oh, the sand are the obstacles that you run into.
Yeah.
So, would you like to close with a closing prayer?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. We've been together, we are together, we are as one in so many more ways than we realize. And we can borrow from each other and from this universe that is in favor of us what we need and what we require and what we desire for the greatest and most wonderful outcomes in any area that we choose. We are not alone. We don't have to be alone. And we need to treat ourselves as if we are alone. So I affirm right here and right now that I am in a universe that supports, encourages, and empowers each and everything that I do. And I speak for each of us. It is done according to our beliefs, and what I believe right now is it can be done. And I am here to make sure that that is so. And so it is.
So it is. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go to share screen. That's where we are. There we go. I walked right by it. And there we go. Perfect.
So, someone, okay, very good. Who can see this transcript reporting on? Someone has enabled closed captioning, and that's fine. And we don't...
Just exit out.
Okay. So, this is your opportunity to practice a prosperity exercise, which is, we have learned that prosperity is not about receiving, it's about giving and circulating. And so as you do that, more good comes to you. It starts by giving. So this is your opportunity. And we say this affirmation, we are affirming. My investment today, as I give, is made with the full realization that God is the source of my supply and returns it to me enriched and multiplied.
And so it is. And if you have any
So it
questions about
is.
how you can donate to our ministry so that it can thrive, how do we do that?
They just go to this website, CSL, Center for Spiritual Living, cslpalmbeaches.org, and there's a button on the top that says ways to donate, and you have choices there. So we thank you, and we need to stop the recording.
Okay.
And so we stop the recording.